Alrighty. So the stuff that we talked about the first session, my assumption is that you would have that kind of spreadsheet, and you'd have an idea of what you want to create instance-wise. And so you've identified some resources. You've created some mock data on that spreadsheet that you want to represent. I feel like I'm really loud. And so then you're going to go into ClinFire. So one aspect that I'm not going to talk about today that's also available as part of David Hayes' kind of suite is an application called Connectathon Manager. And how many of you all been to a Connectathon, an HL7 Connectathon? Okay. Have you been to one where they use the Connectathon Manager yet? No. So Connectathons have gotten so big. I think in Baltimore they're planning on like 400 people. There was about 280 at the one in New Orleans.
Yeah, the first one I managed in 2012 had 14 participants.
Yeah, it's grown a little bit. And so because it's grown, it's not only grown in number of people, but the number of tracks. So there was like 20 plus different tracks. And then it used to be at the end of the Connectathon, they would do a show and tell of what people have done. And it's gotten so big they can't even do that. And so in order to try to capture information in the Connectathons, David built a tool called Connectathon Manager that helps the participants in a given track and the leads in the given track decide what resources they're going to test, what workflow they're going to test, what are the success criteria. And then during that, we also use a tool. You might see a gentleman here, Richard Etma from Aegis. They have a test scripting tool to test resources. So what we're going to use, and you can try to follow, but watch here, is a scenario builder in ClinFire. So who wasn't here the earlier hour? Anyone? Okay. So download the slide deck. The first part of the deck that we did in the first hour was around how to navigate around, how to look at data. And this part is going to be how do you actually create data. What's going to be really important is selecting the servers. And in this example, we're going to have you use the public happy server. But there's a module in here called Scenario Builder. And with a scenario, you can select a new scenario. And so in each of these slides, you'll see where to click. So when you follow along, and I'm not sitting next to you, you'll know where to go. And then as part of that, you name your scenario, and you can put a default category. And the important thing about the scenarios is that whatever you're doing when you're creating a scenario is initially only on your machine. So if you clear your cache, it'll disappear. But at the end, you're actually going to post it onto a server. So once you've created this first scenario, you can hide the information on the left, because you can have multiple scenarios going simultaneously. You're going to do an add resource. And when you add a resource, you can add 3 kinds of resources. For this, when you're first going to do this, you're really only going to add the core resources. But what's nice about being able to select the different servers is that if a server has profiles on it, you can actually search for profiles. And so you would click on the profile link, and it'll bring you up to a dialog where you can pick what base resource, and it'll query that server for any profiles on that resource. But here for core resource, you'll get a list of all the available resources for the version you selected, and you're going to typically we'll just have you start with and create a simple patient. And most of the time, I'm just going to have you do the base resources instead of doing profiles. But you'll select the patient, and you can put a little text here and then you click Add. And once you add it, it adds it here into this list. And this list will be a list of all the resources that you are working on in your scenario. And you'll be able to see a description. Once you start building some, you'll see the graph. I don't really use the fire path because I'm only starting to figure out how to use path. Additionally, if you have a patient on that server you're going to use and you want to reuse that patient, there's the ability to add, I think it's under description, add a patient that already exists into your scenario. So you can also instead of adding a resource through that profile list, if you already have a resource that you've created by hand, or you've brought in and you copied and pasted, you can actually click this import resource and import the JSON, and it'll import it into your scenario. So this is the tree view of the resource. The button, the little world icon here, allows you a direct link. If you click on it, it'll open up another tab and give you the fire specification for that resource. So if you're not sure what each of these elements mean, that's how you can do it. And here you'll see all the starred elements. No, I'm trying to remember. It used to be that they were color-coded for which ones are required, but the reality is patient. I don't think any of the elements are actually required, but that's fire for you. So in this example, I click on the name element. It refreshes this little window right here, tells me the name of the data type, human name. If I wanted to see what the parameters around that, I could click on the globe, and it'll send me to that. But if I click on human name, it brings up a dialog where, and this is the cool thing for those clinicians in the room, this dialog was built based on the FHIR specification, so it's built dynamically on what's available. So in here, he did a pull down for what kind of usage it is. You can add the prefix and all these elements in, and you add save. And once you save it, you're saving it locally. It starts to build the JSON, build the resource for you. And that's one of the things that I try to get clinicians kind of excited about this, because you actually see the resource coming to life as you're building it. And so you would have that tree view, but you can also look at the JSON view by clicking in the current resource view. And here you have the name value pair for each of the elements. So I would show them that where they put in the usual for the type and the given and the family name, this is where it shows up in the resource instance as we're building it. And then the resource as you're building it also comes up here on the screen. And some of these fields you can actually hide to give you some more space. So let's see. So the next thing here would be that you would click on gender. So I didn't create a whole resource, but you click on gender, and you'll get that's a code. And if you're curious about what are the values already in the code, if it's a predefined value set, you can click on the link, and it'll show you what values are available in that value set. For small code sets, gender being one of them, you could see it here. But if you have a complex code set like condition, you could actually there's another dialog in there that you can see what values are there. Because the challenge is the client is using the specification, and say for condition, the binding of the condition code is to SNOMED. So it's going out and using the terminology server and defining the values in that value set using the definition, which is all the children of finding code. And it builds that list dynamically. And so that's why you need a terminology server. And so let me see if I can show you that. But on this page, also, if you created an element and you, oops, don't tell me it's dying. Oh, no. So David worked on the original version of this, and he tried to have the EHR kind of dialogues. And the problem is that we couldn't do that terminology binding. But this view of ClinFire has been pretty stable for like almost 3 years now. And so what he's done is added more modules. And if we have time, if I get through this fast, I can show you some of the other modules. So if you decide that you created an element and you didn't want it, you can click this X and delete the element. And this was from feedback in the early days. If you created it and you didn't like it, you had to destroy the whole resource and restart from the beginning. So once you've created the resource, and so here I've put in a patient's address, I put in a birth date in much the same way I showed before. I clicked here, I clicked on the value, and it brings up a dialog, and I added it. One thing I recommend is that you have a little notepad handy on your desktop and copy these identifiers, because it'll help you find your patients later. And on your list of patients, now you want to know, did you create the resource correctly? And so what you can do is you can click on, there's a little X or a little diagram here, you click on it, and it will actually check the conformance of your resource and validate your resource. And once it's validated, you can then click here and upload it to the server. And remember, on that main screen, you've selected the data server. And so as part of the exercise, I have you create the resource and then open up another tab with the patient viewer and go find that patient on the server and confirm it for yourself that you've created it and it posted to that server. And if you use the University Health Network server, the public HAPI server, go to their website, use their web interface, and find your patient. And you should be able to kind of confirm for yourself that you've posted the right patient. So this tells you that it's that it validates, and if it doesn't validate, you get another tab over here of errors, which is really helpful because then you just fix your errors and you revalidate until you've fixed everything, and then you upload it. One glitch right now that we have that David's working on, along with some help from some other folks, is around profiles. For the US core profile, the base resource doesn't have race and ethnicity because FHIR is an international standard and it's not as important to other folks as it is to us. And so in the US core profile, they added the extension for race and ethnicity. And unlike a standard extension where it's just a name of an element and a value, like a coded value or a string, they made it a complex. So in race and ethnicity, there is race and then there's ethnicity. So these nested extensions, they're working out how to make ClinFire work a little better for that. So it doesn't work as well for US core profiles. You can still read them. So in the exercise that I'd like you guys to do is to set your data and conformance servers to public HAPI 3, and then use the scenario builder to create a patient, record the patient, and then validate it, and then check for yourself that it's there. Okay? Next thing you would then do is you start to create a condition. Again, you would click on, there would be a little button here for add resource. You want to add a core resource, select condition, and it would bring up the definition, the text, the definition for the resource, and you would select. Some of these are red, which means they're required. And so here I want to add a category. Oh, again, the condition shows up as your list of resources that you're working on. And so you might have more than one of the same resource in your scenario, so they'll be listed here. So it's useful to use the text field if you want to be able to read this more easily. So here in category, I know I want to add a codable concept. So I would then click on code. Okay, so it brings up this dialog. And again, in the background, the ClinFire tool is looking at the spec, knows that it's okay, back in business. So again, ClinFire uses the FHIR specification. You know, the binding of the coded element condition.code is bound to SNOMED, and so it went out, retrieves hits the terminology server, and what you can then do is you can start typing a term, and right now it's typed forward. So actually, you type a term and it's going to search the value set for all the matching terms, and so you can select a term. The other option is if you don't know, like LOINC can be a little challenging, so you can also click up here and see the other code sets. So actually explore the code set before you decide what code set you're going to use in your resource. So this is the example where I used that link on the right, and I did an expand, and this gives me the definition of the expansion. So it's all the children that is of the SNOMED code for, I think it's finding a tree. So this is just a good way to explore the value set. So I've selected benign hypertension It puts in the system, which is SNOMED, puts in the code, and defaults it to the preferred term. And it adds it to my resource. So here's code, coding, the value, SNOMED as the system, and the display text. So now, you know that condition actually, you're creating it, but it's standing alone. So how do you make it reference to the patient? So you have to do the references. And in the application, you see a little box with an arrow. So these are the outward references. If you click on subject, it explains it that it has to be of one of these two resource types, patient or group. And then it looks on the list of resources that you've already defined, which ones of those are available to you. And it says, oh, here's patient. So if I click on the plus, it will then create the reference to that patient. And you see it built right here. So this is the reference, the subject, the reference, and is to a patient resource with that identifier. And if you have, I do an error, I think I purposely did an error when I did this. It said that the clinical status shall be present if verification status is not entered in error, verification status entered in error, or clinical status exists. So this is what you see when you go to click and to validate, and it didn't validate. So that tells me I got to fix something. And by the way, there's this little changes here. You can see as you're building it what things you've added. So I went back, I fixed it, and I saved it. And once I saved it, you have a tab where you can do the graph. Remember that really complex graph with all the care plans? This is a simple version that shows you that I created a patient, I created a condition, and that the condition has an outward reference through the subject element to the patient. So as you're building your scenario, you can see how all these resources link to one another. And what we're envisioning as we look at workflow and the evolution of these as part of these clinicians on fire is how can you look at a timeline? And so David's thinking of the idea where you can do kind of snapshots of these resources in this view where you can click kind of backwards in time. So the first, if I had a 1, it might just be patient. I click 2, I'd have patient and condition. If I click 3, I would have more resources. So I can actually see how those resources change. And we also have to consider that the resources itself evolves. Because if you do an order or a request in FHIR terms, it might be started, it might be in progress, and it might be finalized. Well, as part of the workflow, the resource itself actually changes over time with these values. And so we're looking at how can you represent this visually for a user. So in your exercise, you want to take a patient, you create your patient, create this diabetes condition, link it to your patient, and then post it to the server, validate and post to your server, and then add some more. And then again, go back to the patient viewer screen off of the main page, find your patient, and confirm for yourself that you've posted it and you can see it. So here's similar process around observation. Do it on time. So here's an example of I want to do a hemoglobin A1C, and I'm not sure which LOINC code to use. So one of the things when I do these exercises, I have a tab where I have loinc.org on the tab and the LOINC search tool. So you can go to loinc.org, you can sign up for a free account, and you can use their search engine to look through their codes. But here I can also do that by doing clicking on the expand, putting in hemoglobin A1C, and it'll pull me all these all the codes that have hemoglobin A1C on them. What's really important and why it's useful to have someone familiar with the lab terminology or any terminology with you is that the way it's set up in FHIR and ClinFHIR is that it pulls up all the codes. And if you're not a LOINC person, and Stan here is one of the chairs of LOINC, you wouldn't know necessarily that LP, it's a component code for one of the axes, and you shouldn't actually use this code because it might be for method, blood, serum, and plasma. And so you would want to know that you're using this code. So if you're doing these scenarios, what's very helpful is Loink actually has a list you can download of the 1,000 or 2,000 most commonly used Loink codes. So then you can use something that you know other folks are using commonly. So then I've added the code here. It says hemoglobin A1C in blood, has the Loink code connected to it. And then I need to put in a quantity of, remember the X in the element means that you can only use one of the available data types. And for hemoglobin A1C, I want to use a quantity. And so I click on that, and I get a dialog. I put in a value of 6.8 and a percent. And I go to validate. And so if I click validate all, it'll validate all my resources. I can click them individually as well. And so on the task, do the same thing. So the way we laid out this tutorial is that all the other resources are not that much different. You have to understand the resource, but once you can understand the resource and you can pull it up, you would do the same thing. But in terms of planning out your scenario, start with these simple resources, because when you get to care plan, that's actually medication request. In order to do medication request, you're already going to need a patient. You're already going to need potentially a medication, a base medication. You're going to need a practitioner. So think about, as you're building it, the core resources you need to do in order to build the more complex resources, and put that as part of your planning. And that's also the reason why I think it's easier to start with something simple, a snapshot of information in time, versus doing a medication workflow, which is more complicated. So I put David Hayes' blog on here. He has actually a number of tutorials, not only on how to build clinical scenarios, but on other things like the logical modeler that we'll talk about tomorrow, as well as how to do value sets. So just really great place to learn more how to use the tool. And I put in a couple of terminology tools for you. So the plan for me was I want to go upstairs after this and sit at the table. So if anybody wants to try this hands-on, I can be there to help. And I'll be there most of the day tomorrow as well. And we can then, how much time do we have? We have 10 minutes. Let's try something. So here's my contact information as well. Happy to help answer questions. Let me show you something interesting, which is not really in this section, but it might be helpful nonetheless.
Any resource, like a concept?
It can't build concepts because concepts typically in the terminology. So you would start with existing concepts. So you would, whether or not they're HL7 terminologies or SNOMED or Loink. But there are areas. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there are places where there are example value sets that there might be opportunities for you to put something in, but I would suggest doing it very carefully. So I wanted to show you guys this because I think it's also really useful, especially for clinicians too. It's for those who are just a little more on the techie side. There is a module called Server Query, and within Server Query, you can select a server off the list of servers. And I'm just going to use this HSP base. No, actually, I'm going to use the other server. I'm going to use care plan. And what you can do is you can do queries that are available for a given resource. So I'm going to query this patient resource and ask, and have it pull for me all the patients. There aren't a ton of patients on this because they're complex. But what you can do is you can actually add parameters into your search and build the query using the tool. So let's try family, and I think the person's name was Anderson. And it'll write the query here for you. And then you do the execute. And I'm going to pray. Yep. It'll pull the query, and you can see the resource.
How complex can it work there?
You can add as many parameters that are available in the base search. And again, the queries are dependent on the resource itself. So you could look at the patient resource and look at see what operations and that you can run on them.
The tool is going to show you what you can do queries on.
Yeah, so if I do resource type and I push here, I get patient. So here's the spec, and if I look down here, I can find the, where is it? Oh, this interestingly, this pulled up the current build. Operations. Yeah. Everything, there is, oh. Help me out, Simone. Where am I? It should have been on the first one. I'm wondering it's because it's the build and it's not the. It's typically at the bottom here, it tells you what the search parameters are available to you. But this is set to current build, and so. Right here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yeah, so these are all the elements, and you'll see that these were all the same ones that were available when you do here. So.
But I mean, like if you have a more complex resource that has references, will this tool allow you to actually search on references?
Yes, I believe you can. I'd have to look at one of the other resources because patient doesn't have references. But what's helpful here is if you have a small data set, you can do this and it'll pull up all the patients. So I wouldn't do this on another one because there's just too many patients. But where I use this as a useful tool is their HSPC has a Cynthia server, has like 50,000 patients in it. And as an educational thing, I had students, I queried it in advance and found out how many patients on there had a SNOMED code for hypertension, thank you. And I knew it was about 4,000 patients. And so the task I gave to the students was, I have the server, I'll give you the endpoint, find me all the patients that have the SNOMED code for essential hypertension, and build a 2-column table that's male and female broken up by every 10 years of life. And it was a good informatics kind of task and fire task because they had to know that they would have to search the condition resource for a specific code, retrieve all the condition resources, look at the reference to patient, extract that, parse that out, store it in a list, and then requery all those patient identifiers in order to get the list of 4,000 patients and then parse out the age and do the calculation about age. So it was a nice kind of compact example that, that we reasonably did in an afternoon in an informatics class. So, yeah, this is you can look at the tree version of this. We don't have to validate it, and then there's some FirePath if anyone's interested in FirePath. So, any questions? Yes.
So if I have to retrieve the care plan for this patient, how would I go about it?
So what you could do is, so I found the patient. What I would do is then I would copy their ID, VA, patient, Megan. Okay. How do you want to do it? Do you want to find all the patient's records? So
I want to find all the care plans for this patient.
okay, so I could go here to patient viewer. I know her identifier. I select patient. I could put in the ID of the patient. Click load. Oh, no patient found. Maybe I need the other identifier. Yeah, that's the other identifier. Oh, so this is good. Why didn't I find it? I didn't find it because I did the server query on the care plan, and I needed to update this. So this is how you update your server. So care plan. Where is it? Okay, and save. Okay, And then let's close this one out and do patient viewer. Select patient, paste, load. Should pull this patient's. And I can see here she has 2 care plans.
Awesome, thank you.
And you can see the resource graph. Yeah, useful? So making it real for the clinicians. That's what I try to do. Any last questions?
Not just for clinicians, even for developers.
Oh, yes. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Sorry, you're right. Hey, look.
Just take the practitioner right in the middle and move it around.
Yeah, this is fun. So, and then there's some things kind of in progress of like how to create some visualizations. So these are works in progress. So these two, Resource Explorer and Resource Graph, are the most mature. And again, you click on it, you click on the resource, you see the details of the resource, and you can see the references, and it changes the focus. Yes, Floyd.
I'm probably going to ask something it doesn't do yet, but if I wanted to, instead of seeking a value out of SNOMED or a HL7 value set, wanted to select something out of the GSAC value set, NLM, can it do that?
I don't know that we have VSAC as one of the terminology servers, but assuming VSAC's FHIR terminology server, number one, was available through ClinFire. It isn't. And number two, one of the issues we have for good and for bad is that VSAC's behind a firewall, behind a user login wall. And it makes it a little challenging for us as we're creating profiles. So, I'm sorry, we're on time. Actually, I think we actually may have gone a little early. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm here to help, so just feel free to reach out, and I'll be upstairs the rest of the afternoon, and we can try these out if you all like. Thank you.